Decorating Pages is a podcast dedicated to taking you behind the scenes of the designs of your favorite TV shows and films. Each episode, I'll be sharing design stories from some of Hollywood's most famous sets. Interviews from set decorators, production designers, directors, and actors about creating the look of TV and film, about their design inspirations, and stories that take sets from page to screen. Hello, and welcome to Decorating Pages. I'm your host, Kim Wanup, and all I want to do is talk about Secession. How about that? I really feel like it was a good ending, like a good, solid ending. Keeps you wondering, and I'm sorry to say if you haven't seen it, I'm going to talk about spoilers right now. So, fucking Tom, right? Tom. I mean, how do you sit across from a man who tells you he wants to be with your wife and he thinks she wants to be with him and just take it like a puss? I can't. My dog's even mad about it. So, I mean, in that scene, I thought, oh, this is it for Tom. This is the tell. Either he's going to excuse himself, get on the phone to Shiv, tell her, hey, I love you, you're being double-crossed, or that's it. He's going to become CEO. I just felt like this is the defining conversation. And it was. I mean, so well acted, so well written. It's all just very well done. And I'm glad it wasn't really a happy ending. Those characters don't really deserve a happy ending. They're such dicks. Except for Shiv. I actually think Shiv is just trying to look out for herself all the time, and she's constantly being downplayed and not taken seriously. And even with her father, she doesn't really try to double cross in a way. Even when she was going to be with Matheson, she was looking out for her brothers in some way. So she's probably the nicest character of them all, if you can say that. But yeah, Secession. Wow. And next week, if all goes well in scheduling world, I will be talking to, executive producer Frank Rich about Secession, about White House Plumbers, and about the time we spent together on Veep. I got to work with him then, and just a genius. And if you don't know who he is, do some homework. I mean, I'm going to give you a good little intro next week, but boy, what a life, what a career. I'm super stoked to speak with him again and just catch up a little. So, yeah. Back to Secession. If you watch the end of every episode, the writer, director, and some actors usually give a little rundown of what happened in the episode, and I find it helpful because I'm not gonna lie, half the time I don't know what's going on in these episodes. I don't know, I've watched every minute of the show, but there are some parts I'm like, oh, what happened? Okay. But I found it interesting that the showrunner and the director had talked about their last scenes of the show were filmed in Barbados, and it was probably kind of a bummer for the cast to be on location for your last scenes. I know it's you're in paradise and it's beautiful and they got that beautiful sunset shot and everything, but I've ended seasons on location and it just is kind of oh, okay, bye. It's always nice to end on a set and in the stage, and you have a little time to say goodbye and wrap up a little. But a location, you're like, okay, that's a wrap. Now everybody get their trucks, get out of here, and it's a hurry up and get out type deal. And I bet it was a nice little celebration wherever they were, but I was thinking of that as someone who works in production. It's not always the best to end on location. It's not ideal. So that's probably a bummer for them, but hey, they're in paradise. Why not? beautiful beautiful sunset capturing there in the DP, and then the swimming scenes, and the moonlight, and you could see it was a little, I feel like they must have shot it in daytime and then brought it down or something. I don't know. You could tell like the lighting was a little off, or maybe it's my TV. I don't know. But God, that episode, I thought it was great. I thought it was a great ending, and giving a little tell at the end where everybody's going to end up either alone or desperate, or, in a situation you don't want to be in. So, sorry, I'm not trying to give everything away, but I just want to talk about it. So, it's big. It's huge. It's Succession. And other finales this week, the ending of The Marvelous Miss Maisel, which I just keep thinking about also. I just think it was a great season of, mini flash forwards and, wrapping everything up, and finally showing, how she got her like big break. And again, just the design of it is incredible and interesting enough, and the costumes, and the way they shoot it, and the lighting, and the writing. It's a very well made show. And weirdly enough, I was going to talk about this documentary that's on HBO Max, I guess now Max, called The Automat, and how this restaurant in the 40s and 50s was basically like a cafeteria. You go in, you pay a nickel, you get a cup of coffee, you pay 10 cents, you get a piece of pie, and you sit down and you eat and you leave. And they had an automat in the finale of Miss Maisel, and they had everything from the chairs, and they had, I'm assuming they built, because I saw in the documentary, they, all these automat little cubby holes where the food are in like junkyards and everything. So they had to have built all that, which I thought was fantastic. The little trays on the tables that elevate your salt and peppers and ketchup and everything. But so weird that I just watched that documentary, and then they had that scene in Marvelous Miss Maisel, just these Art Deco buildings that they had in and designed and used in New York and Philadelphia. Those were the only two cities that the automat was in. And there's plenty of celebrities throughout the documentary, but Mel Brooks really talks about how great it was and how he used to go there to work and like meet up with other writers. And I remember it because it was actually run by the company Horn and Hardart. And in Philly, one of the last ones of the Horn and Hardarts, they had stopped doing the automat system because they basically couldn't keep up with how cheap it was versus the food that they were doing, and times changing. People weren't eating in the cities anymore. They had moved to urban sprawl, and there was a Horn and Hardarts that my grandmother took me to, and they sold prepared foods. They sold their mac and cheese and cream spinach and everything. And so it's a memory for me to see this Horn and Hardarts documentary and talking about it with my mom, and just really great. It was great little food history there too. But so I totally recommend that, the documentary Horn and Hardarts, or the Automat. Great little American history. And again, the design of those buildings were fantastic. This deco, and the one on Walnut is not there, but I think turned into like a Burger King or something, like awful. So yeah. Another documentary I rewatched because I had seen years ago was the Becoming Mike Nichols, which I watched again because next week's guest, Frank Rich, is the executive producer, but also I just love Mike Nichols. I mean, what a phenomenal career and impact on film and actors and comedy, and I just love going back to see these type of real Hollywood staples and seeing where influences, get their influence and come from. And it's a quick little, he basically he talks about The Graduate And he talks. I forget the other movie he talked. Oh, he talked about Virginia Woolf, being afraid of Virginia Woolf, and his start in comedy. So it's a great little doc on Max again. So yeah, I finished that up again. New Jersey Housewives. The wedding of Teresa was absurd and ridiculous. The decor of that wedding was a Jersey at a 20. It was ridiculous. Just the gaudiness and every detail. I don't know. I'm just kind of like, ugh, I hate it. Her hair, her dress, like, ugh. So if you want to check that out and get a little over the top gross Jersey design, go for that. And then I'm starting up Dead Ringers. And I gotta be honest, I don't really want to watch it because I saw the 1988 Jeremy Irons one and it kind of fucked me up. So I'm not really, the design of it is kind of fantastic and it's shot beautifully. And I'll be talking with production designer Aaron Gill coming up in a week or so. So the design of it is what's keeping me interested in this because I don't really want to see like weird gynecology shit. So that's what I've been up to this past week besides Memorial Day weekend. Going down, we were on the beach, we took a boat ride, my dog went on the boat, a puppy. Yeah, and just a lot of Emmy stuff going on. I've mentioned that I'm an Emmy governor and getting everything ready for voting, which is, also this platform giving people a way to talk about their projects and their wonderful sets that we're all putting 1,000% into. So in the next coming weeks up until voting ends, this is kind of my little push to help, anyone talk about their projects. And I think I have so many that we're going to get double episodes for 2 weeks, people, coming up. If I can pull that off, I'm pretty sure we'll have 2 episodes a week in the coming weeks. So get ready. More one-up. You want more one-up. So yeah. But on this episode, I'm speaking with production designer Rocco Matteo and his current project, Rabbit Hole. Rocco focuses on designs of high-end tech world and then run-down childhood home hideouts in an endless game of double cross on this show that I really enjoyed. It was good to see Kiefer back, and it's like, very high-end, minimalist, and then like down and dirty. They're running around. They're constantly on the run in the show, and we talked about how many locations he had, and making the city look like New York. And we also discussed his design process and his love of sketching to develop sets, which I encourage you to check out his website, cineroc.ca, cineroc.ca. He has some beautiful sketches on there of his past projects. And for anyone looking, at this career, just seeing someone's design process, I think, is always important. So check that out. We also discussed his Kennedy projects, which were 6 years apart, and he was nominated for an Emmy for. He did the Kennedys and then the Return to Camelot, and so I asked a little bit about that and going back to a series that had ended 6 years earlier. So yeah, so I hope you enjoy. Virtual awesome set.
A building I like from an Italian architect. So I'm actually not in the space, right. But it's the old Olivetti Museum in Venice.
Oh wow! I gotta take a bigger look. Wow, that is beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great building. The architect is Carlo Scarpa, who was a kind of an Italian eccentric designer, disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright, but he had his own unique style. And I had a chance to see some of his buildings in person, and they were very, moving.
It is a little Frank Lloyd Wright-esque, I would say.
Yeah,
You could see the influence there of like
yeah.
I'm not a I you know you go to I went to school for architecture and you learn all about it and falling water and all these great buildings. But to me, I kind of feel like Frank made everybody live the way he wanted them to live.
Oh yeah. I think he's definitely a a very large personality in terms of the history of design, and it's legendary his kind of I guess total design imposition mentality.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that people who've had to deal with him as as their builder have stories to tell, and
Yeah.
a lot of them have been really well recorded, that it was an adventure dealing with an artist of his stature and his mentality. So it's one of those things, I guess,
Yeah.
you have to make sacrifices for art.
Yeah. You want one of his houses, you're going to have to live the way he wants you to live.
Yeah.
Really. I'm actually always surprised that there hasn't been a movie about Taliesin and what happened there and the murder and like all of that, like cuz I
I
read that
think
book.
that I remember reading that there were a number of
Oh.
um, well recorded stories that were, I think, optioned to be made into films.
Mm.
And chances are there's, who knows, there may
Yeah.
be issues
Somebody
with
bought
the
it.
estate or just how to tell that story. But
Yeah.
someday I'm sure it's going to happen.
Yeah. And I think as like a production designer, that would be a fantastic get. Like that would be a
I remember reading the article in Vanity Fair that talked about Taliesin from a design perspective and then the relationships between the parties. And yes, it really sounded and read like a visually a fantastic
Yeah.
story to try to tell.
Yeah. I had
Um,
I read that book the like about his lovers, about his mistress, about like all
yeah.
that and yeah. I don't know. I can't think of a better story really. Like I can't
There's
crazy.
probably some great stories to be told about famous architects. Like I think
Yeah.
the same could be said about perhaps not quite as infamous, but equally compelling with a bunch of other prominent designers from earlier in the century.
Yeah.
So,
The
you
only
know,
one I could think of is that documentary. Is it Louis Kahn's son, My
yeah,
Architect? That's right, right? That was so
yeah,
good. That was so
yeah,
good.
that was
It's
good.
sad.
Yeah,
Sad. Well, let's get up on an upper note here. Let's talk about you.
yeah.
Speaking of designing and process and everything, you have a fantastic section on your website of your design process and
Hmm.
renderings and drawings and what a plethora of gorgeous hand drawn drawings and computer drawings. And I would just encourage anyone to take a look at that because really the design process is so fascinating, I think, to people and how we get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Um, you know, I guess I come from a background of having hand drawn, and it's
yeah.
something that it didn't happen naturally from, say, childhood. It's something that I came to a bit later in life, like when you know I was in high school, and it was an academic kind of school, but they had an art program, and of course I was one of those kids that went into the art program, did really well, and then was told to get out of it because who needs art in your
Right.
professional future?
Right.
So it was one of those things where I got talked out of continuing in that, even though I was kind of had a natural aptitude, and then had to circle back to, develop my skills
Mm.
when I decided I wanted to go to architecture school. So, I was one of those naive young people going into architecture without a particularly strong, um, set of skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to quickly like figure out how to get back, like how to learn that. So that took quite a while. In fact, like I felt that I wasn't really comfortable drawing until after graduating from, architecture in university, and just doing that thing where, it's that 10,000 hour rule
Yeah.
where you just have to do something so much and so often until it becomes second nature,
Yeah.
you know.
Well,
It's actually one of the things that I point out to, you know, younger designers that I meet who work with me is, especially now that they're, using computers as a sort of, as the main tool through which they can draw. But I said one of the best things that I was forced to do was to go out into the world and take measurements and then record the world.
right.
And before you could even measure things to do that, you had to take a stab at doing some kind of a layout or some kind of notation to represent what it was that you were going to measure and record.
Right.
Which was not easy to do. Like, how often do you like start a drawing and then realize you've run out of
Yeah.
paper because
Yeah.
you didn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I got good at it to the point where I could walk into any space and lay it out, and it would be almost to scale
Mhm.
without measuring it.
Well, that is something that isn't that's a gift because there is a lot of like, oh, did that jet out there? Did that like
Yeah,
is there an
but
opening there?
it's that relationship between your eyes and your hands.
Yeah.
The immediacy of that is such a useful thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because when in on location scouting and everything, it's quick. We don't have all
Yeah,
day. I mean, unless the art department gets to go back and survey, which we usually do. But, you don't, when you're there, and especially for a production designer, at first going into the space and thinking about, like, is this going to work and what can we do? A quick
exactly. You
survey.
you have to. It's amazing, I do remind people that despite the long periods of prep that we have and the tools that we have, figuring out whether something will work or having an idea to is the smallest window of time.
Yeah.
You have a minute or 5 minutes to think, could this work?
Yeah.
And what would I do?
Yeah.
And then, it may take 5 months to develop it, but you have that short window of time where you can see something and say, I could commit to this and I believe I can make this work.
Yeah.
But that window is so
It's
small.
so small. And you're
Yeah.
seeing multiple locations a day, and it's like, well, I could make this one work, and this one's better, and now I don't know which would be,
Yeah.
the scene or the quicker or budget wise. Like, there's so many elements
Yeah.
that come into the decisions of the input of the designer for the locations, and it's so quick. it's,
Yeah.
I just want to know, when you were in school, did they taught us take one part of your body and measure it, and then you could survey the whole building, and then they didn't let us go to like no measuring tapes, and we all had to go to this building and like survey it,
Well,
which I thought is fantastic.
We weren't taught that.
Yeah.
I wasn't. But by coincidence, I discovered that my foot was exactly 12 inches
Well, yeah. See, then you
from
know.
heel to toe. And so I thought, well, that's handy.
Yes, it is.
So I have used my feet quite a bit, but in fact, it's only useful in plan, obviously, because
yeah, you're not walking up walls.
if you can't walk on walls,
No.
you're not gonna.
No.
But yes, like you definitely learn tricks to do with identifying like relationships.
Yeah.
So, whether it's counting bricks or having a feel for like where a windowsill is and then being able to judge the height of a room, like all those kinds
Yeah.
of things. But yeah.
When you're in the prep stage of your projects, what
Mhm.
is your favorite part of that?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. I would say, as we were just talking about that moment where you have to quickly make a commitment to a direction, I'd say that my favorite part would be those, the first day around that, which
Mm-hmm.
is when I'm kind of working out my first sketches and then thinking, I think this could work.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be a combination of, so the sketches would be twofold. One would be something impressionistic, where I'd say, if I did this and this, I could maybe make it look like that.
Right.
And so it would be an image that I think would be central to a characteristic of the space. It's like, I need this to do that. And then there would be another kind of notation where I'd be kind of working out a plan in a kind of a measured idea to
Yeah.
say, okay, how big does this need to be? Would
Yeah.
it be like this or like this? And I'd work something out. So if it's a location, I'd figure out, is this big enough or is it too big? And how can I make that work? What could I add? What will
Right.
fit to make this work? Um, or conversely, if it's something that I'm hoping to build, it's like, yeah, so if I needed to do this and this, and these are the elements, and we're shooting this kind of format, what would I need to do to make this work? And so yeah, there'll be like two kinds of sketch, a kind of plan notation, and then some kind of a view. And you're kind of seducing yourself. You're saying,
Right.
okay,
Yes, that's a great way
looking
to
at
put it.
this, it's like, you know what? I think this could work. So at that moment, I'll start bringing my team in to say, here's what I think. I need you to develop this to prove me right or prove me wrong. Well, let's see if we can make this work.
Yeah.
But I think this could work.
Yeah.
And then, so that's sort of an exciting moment where it's like I can say I have the idea, bring the team, let's get on to it. And then quite often within like a day or two, I'll get a sense of, yeah, you know what? I think this could work.
Yeah.
This is going to work.
Yeah.
And then, once in a while, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think this is going to quite work. I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board on this.
It's always so hard, like in decorating, when you fall in love with the sofa, or you
Right.
fall, and then it's not gonna work, and I gotta let it
Yeah.
go, and I just put it in a
And
different
the other
Pinterest
thing,
board.
well, like, for example, what happened to us on Rabbit Hole quite often is we'd find maybe a scenario with a great location where it would be like the location has a lot going for it, and these are the things I could bring to it. So that you need to have a certain window of opportunity to take advantage of what the location already has.
Right.
And then, oh yeah, and look, I could bring this and I can do this and I can do this, and great. And then, where you go down the road and then something happens where it's like, oh, you know what? We only have one day there. So you have no prep time.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, the things I was hoping to do, I can't do. Will it still work? No.
Right.
And, so that's happened a couple of times where it was just, the logistics
Yeah.
of working on location. And sometimes that can happen, in the studio as well. It's like we wanted to do certain things where it involved taking a set that we had built, and we knew we also wanted to go further. So, you know, we had blown up the building and we wanted to do the interior aftermath.
Mm,
And it was like, okay, I had a plan. I had it worked out. We had rendered it. We sort of figured out materially what we were going to do. And then when we actually started to get into it, it was like, oh, shoot, I need 7 days of prep time on the stage,
right.
but I've got two other sets in the same space that I have to be able to shoot during that time. And all of a sudden, it didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
It was just like, yeah, that was just one of those things where, when you're laying out the project for the next few months, and you don't have the full shooting schedule really in front of you,
No.
things happen. It's like, oh, well, this actor is only available this window.
Yeah.
We've got to shoot this scene on this set by this date. And it was like, yikes.
Yeah.
All of a sudden that window closed and I couldn't do it.
It's laying out the stages, which is more with the set design and the art director of like where everything's going to go, is so important because it is a domino effect of what's on that stage. When can we get in there? When can we dress this, strike that? If it's a swing set stage and you have a perm set on there, it's a game. It's a constant flux of like using that stage, using that space. And like you said, oh, well, we want to blow this up. Well, that's going to take so and so many days for every department, for paint, for set deck, for lighting. And then you're like,
I'm very involved in that kind of thing because production strategy in television, a lot of the times, even if you have scripts, you don't necessarily think so far down the road where you're like imagining other scenarios. And so I remember this was something that kind of came up in a conversation early, but it was going to be months away. But I remember saying to my team, here are a couple of things way down the road that we have to keep in mind. We want to be able to do this. We want to be able to do this and this. And they were like, okay. Yep, for sure. And then it was just like every week we would kind of look at the plan to say, okay, are we still good? Yeah, we're still good. Yeah. And it was only when it got really into the nitty gritty of actor availability or something else like that, where it all of a sudden started to get problematic.
In Rabbit Hole, in John's childhood home, there's a lot of flashbacks to when he was a child, and then it's this hideout now, kind of,
Yeah.
So I was like, oh my God, such a nightmare. Did they make you go back and forth a lot?
They were going to.
Ugh.
That's the thing. So here's the thing. It's like reading this. So that was the thing. I had, when we started, I guess I had 3 or 4 scripts. And then there were 4 other outlines. So, I put my hand up and said, so let's talk about the story of this arc and what will I need to provide. And so for what I knew then, I'm like, well, guys, we need to go in a certain direction. And I don't want to go back and forth.
Yeah.
And so
thank you.
It got into a whole conversation about how to do that. And, I pointed out the way I wanted to do it was to create the intact environment, the most fully developed, fleshed out environment where it was the real family home, and then go through a process of degrading it, right? And that was good for a while. And then I started to get pushback, which is, no. This director and this thing is available. We want to do this early. So we want you to start with the broken down look. I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to, like, if I'm going to use things like wallpapers and find like in wood paneling, breaking it down is not just surface, it's actually breaking it down.
Yeah.
And so I can't go backwards from that. I'd have to remake it. So no, we're not going to do that. So there was a lot of like push and pull. Um, and ultimately I got my way, but there were a few real challenges, like the study, which gets scorched, like there's a fire that
Yeah.
happens. Um, I was doing that while the rest of the house was still intact because we hadn't finished doing like dinner scenes
Right.
literally next door. So it was just like, oh man, guys, you guys are killing me. But we had to deal with that.
And your decorator is Friday Myers
Yes.
for the whole series? Because I couldn't quite.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic job. I mean, that house is fantastic. The aging
Yeah.
on it, everything.
We, the interior was, so it was an interesting challenge, that whole thing, because um, identifying the house, I had an idea early on when I read the script that it wasn't specific about the house, except that it definitely felt like it was the edge of a town, like a
Mm-hmm.
rural kind of environment. So when we talked about the house and what it meant to do, it was like, well, yeah, we need, we want scenes where, young John and his dad could go out into the countryside. Yes, we want a scene where they're hunting. We want a scene of him and his best friends running and playing in the woods. So already that kind of established the sort of a location idea that, if it's in a town, it should be on the edge of town, but with the countryside nearby. And then it also became apparent that the conversation about the way the house should feel in the present, it was like, well, yeah, you're driving around in a country road and there's houses and pastures and then sometimes there's a house kind of behind so much overgrown landscaping that you don't even notice it,
Mm.
but it's there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we want the house to feel like, so that, he can feel safe
Yeah.
hiding out there.
I mean,
I'm
little did
like,
he know he needed a hideout years later, and that's perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, so when they describe the backstory, which is there's a family home in a seemingly, normal, happy family life. And then a traumatic thing happens that really devastates the family. And well, two things. First, there's a kind of a family breakdown where the family, splits and mom and Junior move out. And then subsequently, when dad dies, there's an even further trauma. And
Yeah.
so allowing the house to basically sit vacant, no one can deal with it
Yeah.
because everything that's happened has been so dark that no one wants to even go there. And then, over the years, we see Junior and his curiosity. He needs to go back there to find out what really happened. And and then, yes, we're surprised later on to
Yeah.
discover that he now has a kind of, it's become a safe place for him,
Yeah.
even though so much bad stuff has happened. Anyhow, it really made the search for the house, like, was one of our biggest challenges in prep.
Mm.
Like, we looked at a lot of places.
And you're filming in Montreal? Was it Montreal? Toronto?
No, I was in Ontario,
Ontario.
outside of
Sorry.
Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so ultimately, we found a couple of places. I found another house that I really quite liked, but then the orientation wasn't good for the cinematographer. And so we, yet again, we were out one day, John and Glenn, the directors, and me and the DP. And it was like, well, I have this other house, but I don't know. It feels like maybe it's not private enough, because you do have a sense of the neighbors. But when we went to the house and we drove up to it, and there's tall trees and a kind of a simple country road, they said, "Oh yeah, this is exactly what we imagined."
Mm.
And I said, well, guess what? This house is part of a whole farm property. So it was a suburban house, but it had been abandoned. They were going to tear it down. And so I actually had the opportunity to make quite a bit of I redesigned the facade. Like there's windows where there weren't windows. And so the only thing was, I had already been working out a kind of an ideal plan. I knew that I was looking for a kind of a broad bungalow, like a ranch style place, because we wanted the sense of being able to walk around on one floor, kind of on a circuit, to sort of exploring different things. And so this house had the ability to do that, but it had this cathedral living room space. So I had to go back into my interior that I had started to design and rework it, like add the cathedral space, make the windows bigger. So it made the interior even larger than it was, but we sort of embraced it. We sort of embraced the fact that this would be a kind of like, it was his inner world, his inner horizon. And yeah, the John and Glenn, the more we looked at it and dealt with it, it was like, yes, we have the exterior. So some of the country landscape scenes, like all of the scenes where they're out kind of in the Glen, Dad and Junior, like, and then going to shoot, to just learning to shoot. That was all in the back 40 of that property.
It's always crazy when you find what you need. You didn't know you needed it. You're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we have this location. Let's use it. Let's really and hopefully you write to this, or you pitch things that are there that can help the story go along with.
And so they were just like, they said, oh, let's and so more and more it became about the opportunity to landscape and then to play scenes in the landscape. So considering the venue was very far out of town, so it was a real commitment to want to shoot there. But we managed to get almost all of the scenes of the woods and the house and all of that, probably in like 3 shooting days.
Wow.
Over a 3-week period. So I had a week between each shift in landscaping look, right? Wow. So it was quick turnaround, but we had the opportunity to really kind of massage it and make it work.
One of the things I did notice, just as like John's character is his apartment and the vast difference from his home, and looking at the wall textures that you picked for that, was that like a character thing you wanted to bring out? Because there's no frills there.
Definitely, like the more we talked about John and what he would say about himself. So when we meet him, we're hearing things from other characters describing John. So the FBI is following him and they're like, it's not suspicious that you don't have credit cards and that you pay cash for things and that, you don't have a smartphone and all these things. It's like, but you deal in media, but you don't have any of these technological things. So, the story kind of quickly took hold about how, we kind of described his character as being very grounded. So materially it was like, so his office is, an old brick building, brick and timber. It's not that big. I mean, it's in New York City, so it's got some mass to it, but it's the most grounded thing. So his house is very grounded. It's and so the apartment, when we meet him where he's residing, it has 2 functions. One is I wanted to have something that had materially at least some connection to the groundedness. So I guess at one point I even said, do we really even need to have an apartment for him? And they said, yeah, we think, so it was like an extension of his office, but
Mm-hmm.
not at his office, right? So it's another warehouse building, but his office is very brick texture and timber. His home is like concrete textures, a
Yeah.
little bit rough, a little bit parged. Some of the paint is a little bit discolored.
It's very
And
cold.
so, I liked the idea that it would just be a kind of an extension of that same theme. Um, but the other aspect to it was, and why they needed him to have this was, um, his whole world, with the exception of his hideout, his house, his safe house, is performative. In other words, he's always aware on some level that people may be watching him or following him around.
Mm.
And so he needed to be making appearances, right? And so the fact that his father would show up
Yeah.
there, like, okay, well, yeah, I
Right.
guess you're not that well concealed. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh no, that's deliberate. He wants on some level, knowing that he's going to be stalked, that he wants to have a consistent outward presentation of who he is,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, really the apartment was, you know, trying to answer the demands, which is, yeah, we want the space, make it part of his language, but obviously try to make it different in some way.
Yeah.
And so that's what we found. And yeah.
You also have the contrast in Miles's office of how like tech and stark and modern. Was that a set or
It's
was
both a
that a build?
location and a set.
It was.
And so what we knew, so that was for me, like in a sense, the most exciting theme of the design of the show.
Mm.
So there's a couple of things about it. So here you have two boys who were best friends growing up, and essentially where our hero John Weir relies on him in a sense to be his other half. In a sense, was like the spine of the design of the show,
Mm.
because it represented the the two halves of kind of the corporate media world that defines the world of the show.
So you
Right?
had the arc. You knew that
Yes.
coming. Yeah.
So, it was explained to me, like I didn't know all the nuance of their relationship, but it was explained to me that the boys, become friends in school, even though they didn't start out that way. And then that John really relies on Valence for advice, personal level, and in terms of the work they do. So they grow up, and they're both they're partners in this media company, and then they set out a plan. We discover later, it's kind of told in a backwards way,
Yeah.
that they split the company to create, in a sense, two versions of themselves. One remained this kind of simple, grounded, small enterprise that worked out of a warehouse. And the other one really took a very corporate approach, very, very public, very, very grand, and went super corporate. But for me, the two of them were the flip sides of the same coin.
Mm.
And so, in terms of how we design the spaces, they're very much kind of mirrors of each other. Both of them are
Mm.
kind. So what we found, so we had to find a corporate building. We had a lobby that we had to be able to create various things in. So the lobby is a location, but I added the security counter, the turnstiles, we added the screens, um, and we needed just to have a kind of grandeur in terms of the plaza and the introduction to the space.
Right.
And then upstairs, we went to essentially, it's a corporate office floor that has boardrooms and a lounge. And in the lounge, we took that over and created our technical data floor.
Mm.
So all of that dressing, all of those people working, we added.
Mm.
And then there's a private room, which was their kind of security comm center. That's a set.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Um, and then obviously the CEO, Valence's office and his outer office, that's also a set.
That's it.
So it's married to the architecture of that location, but the building didn't have a balcony.
Mm.
So we built that on the stage in order to be able to do those exterior things fundamentally, but also to kind of control the views in the space. But essentially, both offices are kind of a range of horizontal spaces divided by glass partitions. In the DBA, the partitions are kind of remnants from like a previous version of what that building would have been. But they manufacture, and so often those kinds of spaces would have like a mishmash of different kinds of glass. I liked the privacy glass that was reeded.
Right.
So you were always aware of spaces next to you, but you didn't have necessarily the clearest view,
Right.
Whereas in Arda, everything is very transparent. It's all about the transparency until it isn't. So there is one beat where they use the electronics filter to frost the glass between Valence and his outer area. But otherwise, the security, the transparency is kind of undermined by the reality that there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
So the transparency is not so much for benign effect. It's there to remind you that you're in a fishbowl and that you're always on and being watched.
Yeah.
In the DBA, it's like, yeah, you're aware you might be watched, but you're still in your own space. You have a kind of feel of somewhat being secure. So it's what I would call that performative security, which is we feel safe, we can do what we need to do, but we can also perform when the time comes, But yes, it was. So it was explained to me and then laid out in the script, which is, yes, all of this is intentional. What's a little unclear in the story and what becomes intriguing is whether or not the two friends are completely on the same page at all times.
Right.
Because you just never know. And that's the underlying, disquiet of the show, which is John's closest people, his dad and his best friend.
Yeah.
He never really knows whether they're there for him or not.
Yeah.
It's an uncertainty. And that really is the fundamental basis of like the anxiety of this world, right? Is he just doesn't know where he stands.
There's just tension. There's just constant tension, which is hard to keep up, like in a script or like
Yeah.
Once they solve one thing, it just unravels something else. Hence, like the rabbit hole. But it's it's it very much kept my interest because of the characters. Because I just
Yeah.
wanted to. I want to know why. I want to know why this is happening to him and why. What does this relationship have to do with anything? And it's just really, it's well done. Very well done.
It's a really interesting, it's a challenging story for the audience because it's definitely for an audience that likes puzzles,
Mm.
that likes twists and turns, and maybe is willing to accept a certain lack of resolution. Because what you learn eventually if you stay with the story is that there is a long game,
Yeah.
and that it's amazing to see, like, you know, John Weir, and the fact that he's played by Kiefer is interesting because, his persona as an actor, as a star, has always been um, security and certitude. Like he knows what he's doing, and he's accomplished. So in this story, he plays someone that has a lot of vulnerability,
Mm.
um, and we're not really sure if he's going to be with it enough to get to the bottom of things.
Right.
But the more we stay with the story, the more we realize, even when we think he's down and out, he's actually fought even more
Yeah.
steps ahead.
Yeah.
So for me, it's impressive and exciting when the underdog, when the vulnerable character proves that there is still something more to give, right? But I don't know. I'm curious. Like, I think the audience will take some getting used to his vulnerability,
Yeah.
and that, yeah, the proverbial rabbit hole is, if you're looking for resolution, like if you want an end point where you can say, aha, we figured it out
Yeah.
and
No.
solved,
No.
it may not be there,
Yeah. But
Um, yeah.
it does wrap a little, it gives you enough wrap up that you keep going. Like you're not, it's
Yes.
not lost. You're not
Yes.
just like, what does that mean? Where are
Well,
we
I don't know if
going?
you've
But
seen have you seen to the very end?
the,
Because
well, yeah.
I know that there was quite a bit of debate about how the last episode, like what kind of ending there would be. And so,
Well,
you know,
I always think that they're looking for season 2 or they're looking for the next, like you gotta,
I think so. Yes, I
you,
think so. But
yeah.
it was, and for me, it was kind of like, well, what does the audience think when it's like, yes, good, we have a potential
Yeah.
for season 2,
Yeah.
but it's like, but are we happy? Like, did we solve enough of the story to say, yeah, okay, we figured out this part? And I guess my answer is, yeah, we got to the bottom of most of it,
Yeah, but
and then there
there's
was
a lot.
still
There's so
more.
much more.
There's
No.
still more to, and it's like, wow, okay. I mean, you just have to love that. You have to want
Yeah.
the rabbit hole to be, infinite.
Yeah, I think too, and attention spans of maybe 4 to 5 seasons at this point is what people can handle. I
Oh
think.
yeah, geez, like that would be a lot.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. I mean, I'm used to some shows like this, yeah, even having like one season. But I do agree. I think, this one, there's still more story
Yeah.
to tell,
And he's a good
because
character. I mean, I think that
yeah,
development of him and all those layers, I think
there's
it's,
there's still more questions I have about the father.
yeah.
And I think there's more, I think just like on some level, the relationship between the dad and the boys, because, it's pointed out that the boys become obsessed with what they discover in
Yeah.
dad's safe when
Yeah.
they open it. And it's only kind of referenced, briefly, but there's a whole subject about, the history of American espionage, the CIA, psychological experiments, and all of that insight and how it's now being used by media and tech companies to, promote some other
Yeah.
agenda.
Well, I mean, a lot of writers have off right now, so I'm sure they're they're thinking sure they're thinking about it. But
um, the other thing about the show, which was exciting, is once you have your heroes on the run, it means that um, every few weeks you've got to come up with a completely new environment,
yeah,
or two or
you don't
three.
have the perm sets to go back to. You have to keep
Yeah,
running.
and
That's
like,
I know I was going to ask about how many locations you had to go through and your prep time with between like shooting an episode and how long were your episodes shooting
so
wise?
our episodes were, well, that's an interesting thing. It's that new reality of trying to make things fit. Um, so sometimes there were details because of the flashbacks,
Right.
right? Details that really belonged to the main sequence. So let's say, the main part of the story of his family home was in episode 2 or in episode 3, but there might be a detail that comes up in episode 4. Well, you're gonna shoot that more or less together with that block in episode 2. Um, but later on, we have other things that we have to provide to make the story work. So while we were shooting, 10 days an episode, some of the strips for some of the episode blocks were like 14 days.
Right. Right.
So we had to do some double up
Ugh,
days
I know.
where we have, multiple units going,
Yeah.
uh, or carry over bits and pieces. So that became very busy. And yeah, essentially, once we got past episode 2, every episode had at least one central environment that was totally new.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, this is a safe house, then we go to another safe house,
Right.
and then we go to yet another place. And then we have this mission, where we're trying to um, sneak into this high-tech world, like this vault thing, and it's like we have to create that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there were some
Well, yeah.
there was a real stretch there
From
of
the
like
from the first
weeks to
episode to
weeks.
the last, I don't know if you had any connecting sets. I mean, it just moves the whole thing. You don't have.
Yeah, like the DBA, which is the warehouse office, it played out in the first 3
Yeah, and then
episodes.
you blew it up, right?
Arda plays out more or less in the first 4 episodes.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, we're in the small town safe house for one long episode, and then that's gone. Then they go to a government safe house, this kind of like old factory, for an episode, and then we're gone from there.
Yeah.
Um,
Now you
yeah,
don't have to tell me because a lot of people don't like to talk about it. But do you think the show was budgeted correctly for all of this?
I think there were certain things that they didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
The way the show is written, it really felt like it wanted to be a location type of show.
Right.
And when I read it, I said, okay, I get that sense, but here's a couple of things you don't know. So it's written for New York. We're shooting it in Toronto. Even in Toronto, coming out of COVID, a dormant city to a very busy city, trying to catch up on everything that it's lost. So
Yeah.
all the street stuff that we did, during COVID, I could walk down like a downtown street and not be hit by a car
Right.
because there was
Right.
nobody out,
Right.
right? But when it reopened, the opposite happened, where literally every weekend there was a festival or a street parade programmed.
Wow.
Every corporation was trying to reopen and get their staff to come back. So all of a sudden, a film company saying, "Hey, we need to be there for 2 or 3 days on your plaza. Can we like have control and have our extras and our cars and they were like, no,
Right.
like we have, this event and this event and this happening and that happening." And I'm like, so it was that forced certain things. Like it forced us into odd scheduling moments, and then the idea of like, yeah, doing stunts like
Oh God,
throwing
yeah,
somebody
blowing
off
up.
a building
Yeah.
or blowing up a building or whatever. It triggered a bunch of other things where we had to build it because the logistics of trying to get into limited availability spaces and then, put somebody in a precarious scenario
Yeah.
with cameras outside on a building. It was just
It
like,
doesn't work.
how are we going to do that? So anyway, the short answer is the production team was really good at kind of rebuilding the budget to provide me resources to do things.
Yeah.
Where I think we were tight, bereft, is on time.
Yeah.
Right. It's
Right.
like time is money. I think they tried to give me whatever they could, and they did, but it was like, oh, can I just move this over here on the other side of this weekend? No, we
No.
can't.
No.
This is the window.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to move that, then you're going to have to do both of these sets on the same day on Thursday, So that was hard.
Yeah.
The double up days
They're
where, like there were a couple of days where I know that the DP showed up and he wasn't like, it was the first time he met the gaffer or the camera operator or somebody. So it was just like, you can't be in so many places at once and you just run out of people.
Did you have 2 DPs?
We did.
2, yeah. Yeah. Because he's shooting and then like probably a scene from his next episode gets pulled up, so then they have to bring someone else in because the other people are shooting, and then yeah.
So and then we're prepping like complicated things either on the studio or on location. And so some of the time just to kind of figure out technical issues. If you remember episode 2, the police station, very, very complex.
Well, yeah,
because the interior and the exterior are different locations married together. And I had to kind of do a trickery matching doors.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of scenery I had to build to convert a library into the police station.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it also required a lot of technical work. Like we had to rework lighting and all kinds of details. And a lot of that was done on weekends and over holidays.
Yeah.
And so you're working over the holiday, but then the next week you still have, 4 sets to do like as part of your normal workflow.
Yeah.
So, there were some really challenging moments, certain sets that, and that's the thing. It's like you have an environment you want to take advantage of and you think it's right there. And it's like, it's right there. It's available to us. But in order to actually make it work, it really required an enormous commitment by the crew.
Yeah.
So.
Because you can't just be on location for a block. Like you can't, your crew will die. And not just the set dressing or art department, like construction and paint and but the shooting crew too, like everything on the trucks, everything back, everything on, everything off. And, it's time,
Yeah.
as you said, like it's time every time they move a company. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot to do.
Yeah, I'd say that like all the departments worked really hard. I mean, construction was um they're like super flexible because they will do an all-night install or a weekend holiday install, right? And nobody want like often the shooting crew won't want to do, and they don't want to work on a holiday,
No.
but somebody has to. And so construction did, Kurt Cheney and his team. But Friday and her team, it's like the police station, a lot of the set dressing now, the reality is we want to use real practical lighting, like
Yeah.
so real fixtures, real luminaires, but that had retrofitted with the programmable LED.
Yep.
So all of our lighting was real, but was also designed and programmed to a board.
Yep.
And so
It's my nightmare.
it's a lot of extra work.
Yeah.
And so I can tell you that 20 years ago, the most we'd have to do is just make sure that that a lamp was wired correctly, and that you had the right kind of bulb. But now it's much more involved than that. So it's like you're rehanging fixtures, you're rewiring the fixtures. So we had a team of wiremen, just the wire people were like 5 or 6 people. It's the whole show.
It's not anything new to light an actor with a practical. That's not new. Yeah. But the new process of it and controlling every light, every fixture, everything in the last like 5-6 years to me has just become overwhelming, and it causes a new position to be made, to be honest, of someone to just deal with the fixtures, because you want 7 locations next week. Do you know how many practicals I have to get that have to be rewired, have to be redone? It's huge.
Absolutely.
It's huge.
We had to have like a person just in the lockup. You had to have a studio, like a shop person just managing the sheer number of fixtures coming and going.
Yeah.
Then the wire team that had to rig it and then, be attentive to the specific demands of like the set and what those lighting issues would be.
Yeah.
And that's before you even get into like installing anything.
No, or finding the doubles. So many times on this last project, I would have to get 5 or 6 options before I could even choose what I wanted, because they would tell me yes or no that it could be manipulated. That process is too long. I don't have time for that. But I did tell the UPM, well, if I'm going to be lighting the actors, I want the money for their package, because obviously their package isn't going to be so big now. So I need that money.
You sound just like Friday.
Yeah.
Like Friday has kind of learned the hard way. Like I'm sure you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like you go through it and then you realize what the shift has been and what the managerial issues are, what the logistical issues are, and the whole kind of requirement to reevaluate how we budget things.
Yeah.
And so that's been an education that thankfully the production team, like the production managers on the last 2 shows, have been really aware that when the decorator comes saying, listen, this is what's happening, right? Here's the DP you've hired. Here's the lighting idea. Here's what this is going to require, right? So don't be alarmed when you see this kind of budget number and this labor flow, right? Or be alarmed if you want, because if this is going to become an issue, we should talk about it.
Yeah.
And where it did become an issue really is the time it took to rig a location, right? That's where it was just like, yipes, like everything seems to fit. The one thing that maybe doesn't fit is, are we going to go into a location and completely re-rig the lighting?
Yeah, every time.
But that's what shows do now.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, when we go on, when it's just a pop-up swing set, I'm gonna rent lamps. My usual is to rent lamps. I don't have to buy everything. And then
Right.
it becomes, well, we're gonna need to buy that because we're gonna need to take it all apart. And it's like, okay. And I have noticed and I started a show that went down. I looked at the previous decorator's budget, obviously, to see what was going on, and she, so smart, she had a separate line for lighting on every set, and I was like, whoa, that's all right. Maybe I should play that game too because,
Yep.
yeah, I'm gonna have to start doing that. It's
Yep.
just a lot more work, but yeah,
Well, that's one of the things that we always talk about Friday night strategically is, do you want to clearly spell out for production what the lighting will cost? Or do you want to play it where you embed it into your overall budget? It's there, it's kind of there, but it's not necessarily spelled out, so that sometimes that's a benefit to you if it becomes a bit of a buffer zone,
yeah,
where you can just put anything unknown, you just put money in there and it becomes a bit of a
yeah,
contingency. But I think on the last thing we did, she did spell everything out. It was just like, because otherwise there was a sort of an incredulity factor, which is like,
yeah,
what? How much do you need? It's like, well,
yeah. But
here it is.
for years and years, like I have always put on some of the invoices or credits like DP requested.
Right.
That at least there's some sort of thing of like I didn't want to buy a 20 more lights. Like they
Mhm.
that's DP requested. Have you worked with Friday a lot?
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably 5 or 6 shows at
Oh,
least.
nice. Oh, then yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And I think definitely because of the kinds of issues we've just been talking about, um, when I've worked with a few good decorators over the years that I really like, and we try to keep going. Um, Obviously, in a career, people kind of like, you know, um, synchronize for a while and then you diverge and then you kind of come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, the last few years, this sort of new reality, especially doing these kinds of dramas, I found, you know, working with the same decorator and her team really
Okay.
beneficial.
Can I jump back to the Kennedys? So I was wondering,
Sure.
which was fantastic. I watched that. I loved it. I love anything
Thanks.
Kennedys. It was fantastic.
Hmm.
Did you know that they were gonna do a second one like years later?
Mm, not really. When we did the Kennedys, what was interesting is that um, there was more story there that they couldn't make fit. They couldn't actually fit it into the package deal that they had.
Mm.
So one of the things was, and for me, it was a tragic omission, which was we shot scenes that was very much the backstory of the patriarch
Of Joe.
Joe Senior,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really essential to in terms of the theme of the story, which is, why did a lot of those things happen down the road that happened? Well, it all goes back to kind of emotional and real things that happened in the father's life that we wanted to portray. But we started shooting it and then ended up having to cut it. And we didn't proceed that way because, you know, of the amount of time it would take within the block of space that they had committed.
Right.
So there was always a sense that, maybe we'll come back to this and in a sense go into the prequel, like really go into explore the stuff that we were forced to leave out. So, if anything, that's kind of where we thought it could go. But I think what ended up happening is the various production entities were just curious at, you know, talking about the characters that weren't necessarily featured. So Head's story, which wasn't featured in the first Kennedys, was always sort of like, well, maybe we'll get to that.
Right.
And so that one came up. And then, you know, wanting to deal a bit more with Bobby. But for me, if anything, it was going to be more about Joe, but that didn't happen. And that was, it's still, I think, you know, a very missed opportunity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it sets so much of history up.
Yeah.
It's like the effects that him and his children have had on America is unbelievable. So, yeah.
And that relationship between, you know, the children and the parents, it's, you know, it's very much like in the spirit of like watching Succession. Like, you know, when I watch that show, all I think about is, oh yeah, like this is another one of these great family tragedies.
Yeah.
You know, like it's a story of power and, you know, building of a nation building, but it is an enormous kind of family tragedy.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, you get to explore the central figure, you know, that's what I think was missing for us.
Yeah. Did you see last night's Succession?
I am still a few episodes behind.
You better get caught up because you got 2 weeks left before the finale. So.
I know. I tend to, like, what I try to do is I'll let them play ahead, and then I'll binge watch. Because I hate watching one episode at a time. I'll do 2 or 3 at a time. Yeah. So that I'm paying attention. So that's my plan anyway.
I try to do that, but then it's so good I can't, and I want to talk about it. It's what is there anything else that you're watching that's inspiring, or you're a big fan of the design?
Oh, geez, there probably are, but I get distracted because my partner will make me watch things, and sometimes I'm like, why am I watching this?
I have that too.
I started watching the new Bridgerton, Queen Charlotte.
Oh yeah, I'm not into it.
And I'm in that kind of debating mode myself about do I invest in this because, you know, so the thing is, it's undeniable, like the quality of the locations and the costuming in that. It's like, it's hard not to want to indulge in seeing that. But you know, like I will often go and try to find obscure things to test my own kind of aesthetic, you know, interest. Like I got really hooked on Copenhagen Cowboy.
Oh, what's that?
I don't know if you've heard of that.
I have not.
Nicholas Refn's project that he made back home in Copenhagen during COVID. So, you know, his style, which is very minimalist.
Yeah.
And, you know, using color blocking to kind of present a sort of like emotional landscape to his characters. So that's a story, I guess. It's his kind of version of a superhero story. It's kind of a superhero woven into like parable fairy tale mythology.
Copenhagen Cowboy. Do you know what it's on?
It was on Netflix.
It's on Netflix. Oh.
Yeah. I think it's only 8 parts. It's, I mean, very acquired taste, but...
I'll check it out. I got a lot of time.
I found that some of the imagery
It's always interesting to me that the same problems arise kind of on every show, like how we talked about lighting, or, you know, him having not enough perm sets, you know, to fall back on because he had so many location sets, which we've heard many times recently from designers. So we're all in it together, and it all takes a village to get these projects done and look so great. So I thank him for talking with me about that. Yeah, it was so nice to meet him. So coming up next week is Frank Rich. Then I have production designer Jamie McCall, production designer Erin McGill, production designer Anastasia White, and set decorator Helena Swap. And I think that's gonna be the little Emmy breakdown for the next couple weeks. I hope, you know, everybody's schedules kind of coming in and out now, but yeah, it's exciting. I hope you're getting to watch all this great work. And if you're an Emmy voter, it's the easiest time to vote. Everything's on that platform of your FYC platform, right on the website, your members login. It's like super easy. They made it for us. Like you just click and go to Apple and the shows are right there. So yeah, totally easy to just check out people's work and see what they're up to. So I hope you got an earful. I'm Kim Wanup for Decorating Pages.
Welcome to Pro Tips for the Pros, brought to you by Floor & Decor Bailey's Crossroads. In this series, we'll explore essential advice for professional contractors to deliver outstanding renovation results. Let's dive in. Before starting any renovation project, take the time to plan meticulously. Assess the customer's needs, budget, and timeline to ensure a smooth and successful renovation process. Thank you for joining us for this pro tip on planning thorough renovations. Stay tuned for more expert advice brought to you by Floor & Decor Bailey's Crossroads.
A lot of people tolerate ordinary. Ordinary bathrooms, kitchens, entryways. Well, not on your watch. If you're a pro, you've got a new partner in town. Floor & Decor. From tile to wood to stone, Floor & Decor has more styles and job lot quantities of Schluter, Mapei, Laticrete, and other brands pros trust. Come see a whole new way to wow with Floor & Decor. Coming soon to Bailey's Crossroads.